Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is September the 27th, 2024. It has been 3,896 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 219 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 216 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 53 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened on Thursday and Friday morning. Our Russia-Ukraine war map is a great companion to the podcast, and there is a link in the podcast description. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. New nuclear threats from autocrat Vladimir Putin highlight how the world remains caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 2. The lack of a meaningful response by Ukraine's allies and international organizations to open and unrestricted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia has convinced Moscow this is an effective strategy with no political consequences. 3. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 4. Further, in our assessment, the claims from the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, that Russia plans to target critical electrical substations over the winter to knock Ukraine's nuclear power plants offline, potentially leading to a nuclear accident, are credible. 5. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance, the United States and Germany is a complete failure that has only encouraged Russia to escalate hybrid and kinetic warfare actions against the NATO alliance and Ukraine's allies and their economic interests. 6. Autocrat Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 15th is unrealistic and unlikely. 7. The Russian economy is much weaker than reported. The operational tempo remains at near-record levels, with Ukrainian forces holding most of their defensive positions. Yesterday, Russia carried out 187 discrete assaults, and through September the 26th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 174. In the Kursk region, Ukraine controls 1,042 square kilometers, with another 281.5 in the grey zone, for a total area of 1,323.5 square kilometers. That's unchanged from yesterday. Today's podcast will focus on the areas where there were changes on the battlefield and highlight significant activity. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in northeastern Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. Yesterday, there were no changes in territorial control in the Kursk region of Russia. In the Glushkovo district, fighting continued in the area of Veselaya and northeast of Medvezhye. Near Korenevo, the Russian Ministry of Defense, or Armad, claimed that Ukrainian forces were on the offensive in the area of Obukhovka, finally admitting what satellite intelligence has shown since September the 12th, that Russia does not have full control of the settlement. Russian sources also claimed Ukrainian forces were on the offensive west of Lyubimovka. A geolocated video that we link to in today's situation report, there's more information in the podcast description, showed 2 Russian soldiers unsuccessfully trying to run for cover on the western edge of the settlement. In Volokhansk, Russia turned an operating farm into a fire base for an improvised armored vehicle with a Grad rocket launcher. After observing the vehicle fire from the farm, a drone directed a rocket attack, which destroyed the launcher and the barn it was using for concealment. In the Sumy Oblast of Ukraine, a Russian airstrike on Yunakivka killed 1 civilian, and a drone attack on Druzhba wounded 3. Russian oppositional news source Novaya Gazeta reported that the Federal Security Service of Russia, that's the FSB, Special Operation Forces, also known as the Spetsnaz, were struggling to support their mission objectives. The Alpha and Vympel groups specialize in counter-terrorism missions against small cells and are ill-equipped to fight against a professional military with combined arms resources. On August the 9th, autocrat Vladimir Putin shifted command in the Kursk Oblast to the FSB, declaring that Moscow would treat the Ukrainian counter-invasion as an anti-terror campaign. Russian sources are reporting that it remains unclear among troops and field commanders if the FSB or the Ministry of Defense is in charge, and Russian units remain poorly coordinated. Ukraine has removed over 30 tons of dead fish and aquatic life from the Desna and Seym rivers due to the mid-August discharge of molasses from the Tyotkina sugar factory. The sugar reportedly caused an algae bloom which deoxygenated the water, causing the mass die-off. Let's talk about what is happening in my home of Ukraine. Near Kupiansk, Russian forces conducted a battalion-sized attack using mechanized infantry northwest and west of Piszczane and suffered catastrophic losses. A preliminary review of the first videos shows that 14 Russian vehicles were destroyed and 26 damaged, including 13 tanks, 15 infantry fighting vehicles, 4 armored personnel carriers, including 3 MTLBs, 3 Ural military trucks, 1 Bram armored engineering vehicle, an UAZ-452 Lov, and an ATV. In the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces made a small advance west of Novovodyane, reaching a woodlock before the Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade stopped the advance. Near Chasiv Yar, 2 Russian soldiers were able to cross the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in Kalinivka, but were under surveillance by a Ukrainian drone the whole time. Running almost 500 meters toward Ukrainian lines, they hid in a bombed-out building, where a first-person view one-way drone ended the incursion. The Ukrainian Air Forces conducted a rare airstrike on the front lines, using GBU-39 small-diameter bombs to attack a Russian troop concentration in occupied Avdiivka. For the second time in less than a month, in northern Novogrodivka near Pokrovsk, Russian forces tried to use the drainage tunnel under the railroad tracks as a shelter. The first time, a drone eliminated the soldiers. This time, Ukraine sent in an uncrewed ground vehicle armed with 80-62 anti-tank mines. We'll link to that video in today's sitrap. In occupied Shevchenko, Ukrainian drones directed an attack of M30 rockets with submunitions on a large Russian troop formation. A convoy of at least 10 Ural military trucks and support vehicles came under fire after inexplicably stopping on the side of the road, with most vehicles remaining in a tight formation. The number of casualties is unknown at the time of publication, but up to 10 vehicles were hit, with one carrying ammunition exploding. In August, an almost identical attack on a Russian convoy in Oktyabrskaya in the Kursk region killed and wounded up to 400 Russian soldiers. Near Selidove, drone strikes by the Birds of Magyar unit west of Ukrainsk revealed the Russian route of advance to the railroad grid. The latest video from Robert Magyar Brovdi with his magic pointer showed the bada-boom of 3 Russian vehicles. There was a small change to the line of conflict, reducing the area of Russian control. You don't know about his magic pointer? He points at something on the computer screen, and it blows it. A Russian flag appeared over the school building on the northeastern edge of Hirnik. The map was adjusted, but the placement strongly suggests a drone dropped the flag. East of Kurakhove, a geolocated video from Armored showed a Ukrainian position being shelled. This revealed that Ukrainian forces had regained control of part of Vostre, and based on the new intelligence, the map was adjusted. At Vuhledar, Russian forces have advanced from the west, remaining on the eastern outskirts of the settlement and at coal mine number 1. Unable to advance into the Ukrainian stronghold, Russian forces carpet-bombed the entire area with thermite. Earlier in the day, Russian drone operators dropped leaflets calling for Ukrainian troops to surrender. A soldier with the 72nd Mechanized Brigade released a video from Vuhledar denying the report from Forbes that they were conducting a withdrawal. Quote, "I want to dispel all doubts and the opinions of pseudo-experts claiming that the 72nd Brigade has withdrawn from the city of Vuhledar. Despite heavy assaults and difficult circumstances, we are still here. Glory to Ukraine." At the time of publication, there were new claims that Ukrainian forces had conducted a partial withdrawal, and Russian troops had made further advances in 3 directions. There was a lot of activity in the Mykolaiv and Odessa regions, so the region gets its own section. A Russian one-way drone struck a Ukrainian Project 2220 Yaroslavets tugboat at Ochakiv in the Mykolaiv Oblast. The drone appeared to hit the aft superstructure of the tug, with the grainy video ending at impact. After Russia was dragged at the United Nations for 2 days, the Biden administration announcement of almost $8 billion in military aid and Putin's nuclear threats, it took less than 24 hours to violate NATO alliance airspace. During a Shahed 136 attack on the Odessa port of Izmail, one of the Russian drones entered Romanian airspace for up to 3 minutes. 2 F-16s with the Romanian Air Force were put on combat air patrol at the start of the Russian attack. After radar showed that a drone crossed into Romania, 2 F-18s with the Spanish Air Force, as part of a NATO alliance air defense mission, were scrambled. Were you expecting more? They returned to base around 4 in the morning local time without engaging the Russian drone. Don't want to escalate. The attack on Izmail killed 3 and wounded 12, including a child. One of the dead was a woman born in 1934, spending most of her life on the Danube. Holodomor didn't keep her from being born. She survived the Nazi invasion of World War II, the fighting to restore control of the region by Soviet troops, Stalinism and Russification. She didn't survive autocrat Vladimir Putin. The Iranian-sourced drones launched by Russia destroyed and damaged private homes and apartment buildings. 24 of the 32 UAVs were intercepted. A separate missile attack in the Odessa district killed 1.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Today's Theaterwide update is a lot calmer. Speaking with the United States news agency NBC News, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that Putin's latest nuclear threats were provocative rhetoric. Quote, "Look, it's totally irresponsible, and I think many in the world have spoken clearly about that when he's been rattling the nuclear saber, including China in the past. So I would just say, especially to do that now, while the world's gathered in New York, including talking about the need for more disarmament, non-proliferation, I think that's going to play very badly around the world." The spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, warned that Russian forces are preparing to increase offensive operations in the eastern Zaporizhia region. Quote, "Our intelligence reports that the enemy is gathering personnel for assault groups near Priyutne. The enemy has received 25 buggy vehicles from the reserve storage base of the southern military district of the Russian Federation." Voloshin added that reconnaissance and sabotage squads were probing Ukrainian defenses in the area, saying, quote, Their tactic is to quickly cover the distance between trenches, between the front lines, and to establish themselves in our trenches. A report in the Wall Street Journal shared the high praise Ukrainian troops have for the Bradley Infantry Fighting Vehicle, or IFV. One Ukrainian unit received 7 of the IFVs 8 months ago, and despite being hit by drones, anti-tank weapons, and running over anti-tank mines, none of them suffered irreparable mission or mobility kill damage. One sergeant told the newspaper that Russian drones hit his Bradley 7 times in a single combat mission, and it was able to return to base with none of the crew suffering major injuries. A Bradley fighting vehicle in its natural habitat, doing what it was built to do: destroy Russian armor and protect troops fighting against Russian aggression. The Bradley is so good that Russian troops were using a disabled one in the village of Sokil as a shelter. Russian state media released 2 videos showing Moscow's version of the Dragon drone attacking 2 different Ukrainian positions. While neither attack appeared to be particularly successful, with 2 of the 3 drones possibly having some degree of technical issues, in our assessment, the development should not be dismissed. Russian operators will improve their formulation for the incendiary mixture and their tactics. Yesterday, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, arrived at the White House after his counterpart, Joe Biden, announced almost $8 billion in military assistance and new programs that will support Ukraine. Before they moved to their private meeting, both issued statements, with President Biden reaffirming United States support for Ukraine's accession into NATO. The 2 leaders discussed Ukraine's victory plan in detail, and Zelensky briefed Biden about the current situation on the battlefield. Zelensky then met with a bipartisan group of more than 15 senators, including Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. He also held a separate briefing with a bipartisan group of congresspersons. After the meeting, Zelensky wrote on Twitter, also known as X, quote, "We are at a critical juncture in this war. We need really strong pressure and strong positions for Ukraine. We also discussed the situation on the battlefield, the protection of our energy grid, and the preparation of our country for the winter ahead. Freedom relies on the bipartisan support and determination of the United States. I am grateful for America's support for Ukraine, which saves lives of our people and helps defend our independence and freedom." The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, did not join the meeting. Zelensky then visited with Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris, with the pair releasing individual statements of support. Here is Vice President Harris.
That the United States shares your vision for the end of this war, an end based on the will of the people of Ukraine and the UN Charter, and that we must work with the international community to secure a just and lasting peace. And I told world leaders there, nothing about the end of this war can be decided without Ukraine.
Several Republican members of the Senate Armed Service Committee joined the White House and the Pentagon, calling for Johnson to end his call to dismiss the Ukrainian ambassador and for Congressman James Comer to drop his investigation. Senator Roger Wicker dismissed claims that Zelensky was part of a Ukrainian organized staged political event, saying, quote, "If President Zelensky came to Mississippi, he would be accompanied by Republican officials, because that's who the people in their wisdom elected." Nothing will likely come from yesterday's political theater. Congress entered their pre-election recess and won't return to session until mid-November, and then will enter what is called a lame duck session. Former President and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump released a letter sent to him by Denis Senik, the deputy ambassador of the Embassy of Ukraine to the United States, requesting a Friday meeting between the former president and President Zelensky. Trump released the letter on his social media platform, Truth Social, without comment. Trump agreed to the request, and Zelensky extended his stay in the United States for the New York meeting. The New York Times claimed that an unpublished intelligence report concluded that if Ukraine is permitted to conduct deep strikes within Russia, Moscow could further escalate against Ukraine's allies, including a kinetic warfare response. The White House did not respond to a request to comment, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence would not comment. The anonymous report concluded that Russia could retaliate with greater force against the United States and Ukraine's allies, potentially including arson, infrastructure and industrial sabotage to kinetic attacks on US and European military bases. It also questioned how many missiles France and the United Kingdom could provide for new strikes and suggested that granting permission for deep strikes created more risk than reward. The European Union and more than 30 additional countries outside the economic bloc signed a joint declaration committing to the post-war restoration of Ukraine. The consortium of almost 60 nations pledged to help Ukraine achieve EU membership, coordinate support through the Ukrainian donor platform, and provide $50 billion by the end of 2024 using frozen Russian assets. In return, Ukraine agrees to continue to implement required government and social reforms. Wait, $50 billion? The European Union announced early in the month they were going to move forward with a $39 billion package using Russian frozen assets due to delays in participation from the United States. Nothing was said indicating that Washington rejoined the initiative, but the commitment of $50 billion indicates that another partner nation, or nations, has stepped forward. That could include the United States. Later in the day, Canada reconfirmed the $50 billion figure. The United Kingdom is poised to exceed a goal set by Prime Minister Keir Starmer to deliver 12 AS-90 155mm self-propelled howitzers within the first 100 days of forming his government. Britain has already delivered 10 to Ukraine, and 6 more are slated to arrive, quote, in the coming weeks. The announcement comes on the same day that the British news agency The Times reported that the West has almost exhausted its collective weapons stockpiles due to the continued support of Ukraine. Britain's Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Ministry of Defence, MP Luke Pollard, stressed that Western allies must now develop a new strategy to maintain a steady flow of equipment and ammunition. One more story. Germany announced it was increasing its military aid funding to Ukraine by $445 million in 2024. The money is earmarked for air defense, tanks, drones, and ammunition. Our War Crimes and Human Rights section can cover difficult topics, including torture, gender-based violence, war crimes, and violence against children. Today's report does not include graphic content, but covers the human impact of war crimes. Listener discretion is advised. The traumatized Ukrainian soldier who could no longer talk, who was part of a prisoner of war exchange on September the 14th, said his first words. Yuri Gulchuk, 22, is a Marine in the Armed Forces of Ukraine and was captured in 2022. A Ukrainian soldier who was with him in captivity said he stopped talking and became emotionless in June 2023 after returning from a torture session. His mother revealed that in their first conversation, he said it would be better for her to talk to the psychologists to explain exactly, quote, why there is so much pain, why there are so many lies, and why people are so cruel to each other. Speaking with United States state media agency Radio Liberty in hospital, the pale and gaunt Gulchuk apologized for being, quote, a little lispy, while saying he was feeling okay, adding he even got on my feet a little today. Gulchuk was in Russian captivity for over 2 years, and human rights organizations have repeatedly stated that Moscow only releases the healthiest prisoners during exchanges to prevent negative press and social outrage. We link to the video of the Radio Liberty report in today's C-Trap. There's more information in the podcast description. Energoatom reported that another Russian Shahed 136 one-way drone flew dangerously close to a nuclear power plant, this time in Rivne. Overnight, Russia shelled the historic Nikopol Medical College in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, destroying the structure. The building was constructed in the 1890s and survived Tsarist purges, the Red Terror, Stalinism, fighting during the German World War II advance, Nazi occupation, fighting to push the Nazis out, Stalinism Part II, and the collapse of the Soviet Union. It didn't survive Putin. Russian targeted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure killed at least 10 and wounded 58, which includes the previously mentioned casualties in the Sumy and Odessa regions. 15 of the wounded were in the Kherson Oblast, where Russian drone operators continue to go on safari, as they call it. Civilians are targeted with one-way drones and drone-delivered IEDs, with Russian troops documenting their war crimes on the social media platform Telegram. Qatar announced that it had brokered another deal between Russia and Ukraine to repatriate 9 children and 1 adult who were illegally deported. Ukraine has agreed to send 4 children to Russia to reunite with their parents. We never end a podcast on war crimes, so once again, it's a visit to land of Mobix, mobilization and Mir. Near St. Petersburg, a video was released showing a large amount of military equipment being moved by train, including 28 Ram Diesel Akhmat ZSTS infantry mobility vehicles and a near equal number of Ural military trucks. 2 interesting things. First, Russian equipment movement by train has less and less armor and artillery pieces. Second, all of the vehicles were emblazoned with the previously unseen tactical marker. The STS-IFV is used exclusively by Chechen forces, but almost always for internal security and not frontline duty. A lot of digital ink is being spilled about Ukrainian troop shortages and the mistake Kyiv made by waiting too long to start mobilization. And I've talked about it in earlier podcasts. In Russia, the number of complaints from disabled soldiers being sent back to the front keeps growing. A Russian VDV soldier who was critically wounded and had lost partial use of his left arm and hand was ordered to receive a physical, and he recorded himself opening the post-physical letter from the Military Medical Commission. To his shock, they determined that he was fit to return to military duty, and worse for him, he had been reassigned to a Storm Z unit. The VDV frequently works with Storm Z units which conduct human wave assaults, with the VDV moving forward if the Storm troops survive the assault and hold the positions. He knows exactly what this means for his future, and in the video he breaks down crying. And that's what we know. Join me again on Monday. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.